Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. For those new here, my name's Nicki. I'm an author and editor and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading and all the other things I love. Today you're joining me for a crash course in the classics and we're talking about Thomas Hardy. So first of all, I'll give you a little brief overview of his life, then we'll have a little discussion about some of his major works, adaptations and how to approach his writing. So to kick us off, Thomas Hardy is born in Dorset in 1840. And he is the eldest of 4 children of a stonemason. He grows up in a fairly isolated environment in a little cottage. However, at age 9 he moves to Dorchester to attend school. By 1856 he is apprenticed to an architect, and in 1862 he goes off to London to be a draftsman at a firm there. Things go well for a few years, but then he becomes ill, so 5 years after his departure he returns back to his native countryside. It's at this point that he begins writing. He starts off with poetry, however he doesn't get any of this published, and his first book ends up being Desperate Remedies, which is a short novel that comes out in 1871. In 1874 he gets married to Emma Lavinia Griffith, and she is a sister of a rector. Both their families are pretty much against the match, but it goes ahead in the end. And it's at this point that he really has abandoned architecture in favour of writing full-time. Far From the Madding Crowd comes out in the same year as he marries, and it initially comes out in serial form, just as many of Dickens' works did around a similar period. It's in the early 1880s that he and his family move to Dorchester, and he builds a house there, Maxgate House, which is where he lives for the rest of his life. And he establishes himself in the town by becoming one of the local magistrates, because obviously he needs to establish himself in the middle classes, whereas he's come from a working class background. So he continues writing throughout the 1880s and 1890s, and it's when his later works such as Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Jude the Obscure start to garner quite critical reviews. People accuse them of lack of morality and various things like that. He becomes disheartened by prose and turns himself pretty much exclusively to poetry. He's got some frictions happening in his marriage by the 1890s as well, and Emma dies finally in 1912. He marries again in 1914 to a woman who's about 38 years younger than him. However, she does look after him, cares for him in his old age, sees to his needs and comfort. And Hardy finally dies in 1928. His heart is buried in his local parish churchyard in Dorset, but the rest of his body is cremated and interred in Westminster Abbey with a great deal of pomp and ceremony, because he was a very popular writer within his lifetime. So let's just talk about his works a bit. For the purpose of this video, I'm really not discussing the poetry. I have a nice big thick volume of his poems here, and they are wonderful. But we're talking about classics more in terms of novels, so I'm not going to be mentioning them too much in this video. He preferred his poetry to prose on the whole, but in many ways he is remembered more for his novels. The works all take place in rural settings, so there's a sense of the vanishing rural world that permeates through a lot of his writing. He also has a lot of other themes that come up in his novels. The idea of alienation is often quite important, particularly in regards to the place of women in society. And looking at social expectations, particularly in terms of morality, sex and marriage. He also tends to look at social economic issues and values. And finally, there are often fairly tragic elements in his tales as well. So, what are some of the key works by Thomas Hardy? I'll pop them up here for you, but I've picked out just 6 to concentrate on. Desperate Remedies, 1871, which was the first publication. Far From the Madding Crowd in 1874. The Mayor of Casterbridge in 1886. Tess of the D'Urbervilles in 1891. The Well-Beloved in 1892, initially in serialisation form, and then later in, I think about 1897 it was, published as a book, and Jude the Obscure in 1895. So we've talked a bit about the themes. In many ways he's a fairly typical Victorian novelist. Certainly there's a sense of the natural in his stories, a realism. which permeated works of the period. In many ways, he's the country equivalent of Charles Dickens. That's how I've always viewed him. So you think of Dickens was London, he is the city writer, and Thomas Hardy was writing similar stories with focus on character, setting and issues, but in the country. So how do you approach these works? If you're going to read Thomas Hardy, the first one I would suggest you pick up is Far from the Madding Crowd. It's not a hugely long book, so it's not a big slog to read. It deals with a lot of the issues that permeate all Hardy's books, but it's not quite as dark as, say, Tess or Jude the Obscure. So it's a nice one to kick you off. I mean, I have pretty much all Hardy's works now. I think there's maybe just one or two I've still got to get. You've got a few here, and I've got another 7. They may be just out of frame, I'm not sure, just up here. So that's a great place to start, and then move on to Tess, Jude the Obscure, Mayor of Casterbridge, and then some of the more minor works, such as The Well Beloved, which I really love The Well Beloved, but it's not one of his more famous works. What else do, Return of the Native, Woodlanders, Pair of Blue Eyes, Under the Greenwood Tree, The Trumpet Major. Those are all slightly more minor works, but worth reading, but probably start with Far from the Madding Crowd. If you're someone who does enjoy seeing some of the show or seeing some of the stories before you read them, there are some adaptations naturally out there. For Far from the Madding Crowd, there's been numerous adaptations, not only film and TV, but musical, a play, ballet, opera. It's a very popular piece. There was a TV version in 1998, which is worth checking out, and there was a film version in 2015 as well, which you might want to have a look at. For the Mayor of Casterbridge, there's also been an opera of that one, would you believe it? I would check out the TV version from 2001 if you'd like to have a look at that one. Tess of the D'Urbervilles, wow, it's been filmed so many times. There's also opera, plays, and musicals and the like, but a few versions that maybe you want to have a look at. There was a 1979 film by Roman Polanski, which you might want to check out, and in TV versions, 1998 there was a decent one, and 2008 as well. And finally, Jude the Obscure. There is actually a musical of Jude the Obscure, which I find a little bizarre. I don't know, but there's just something that doesn't really feel like a musical story to me. But then I guess people would have thought the same about Les Miserables and the like. So I haven't actually heard the music from the musical, so I can't really judge it. But there was a film done in 1996 with, I think, Christopher Eccleston and Kate Winslet. So you may want to have a look at that one. So that's a very brief introduction to Thomas Hardy and his works. I hope you found it interesting. If you've got any questions about Hardy's works, pop them below and I will answer them if I can. Do you have a favourite work by Thomas Hardy? Tell me that in the comments too. I will end there for now, but I look forward to seeing you all again very soon with another vlog. Bye for now, everyone.